They say hindsight is 20/20ths, but in my case, it was more like a pair of fogged-up glasses. If someone had told me a month ago that my life, my marriage, was a fragile facade, I would have laughed in their face. My wife, Rachel, and I were the picture of suburban bliss, a lovely home, 2 kids excelling in school, and the kind of routine life that was supposed to feel like an achievement. But hindsight, oh, how it clears the fog. It all began on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower that had decided to give up on me mid-yard, when I heard Rachel's laughter filter through the open kitchen window. It was loud, carefree, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. Curious, I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped inside. She was on the phone. "I'm serious. You'd better bring the wine. Oh, and don't forget the playlist," she giggled. Our eyes met as I entered the kitchen, and for a split second, her expression faltered. Just a flicker, really, like a drop of rain on an otherwise sunny day. She recovered quickly, smiled, and mouthed, "1 second," before turning her back and whispering into the phone. When she hung up, she turned to me with that practiced, effortless charm I'd fallen for years ago. "That was Beth," she said, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "We're planning a little girls' night this weekend. You're okay with taking the kids to your mom's, right?" "Sure," I said, not thinking much of it. Rachel had always been social, and girls' nights were her escape from the monotony of suburban life. But something about that laugh, it lingered in my mind longer than it should have. That evening, while Rachel showered, I sat in our bedroom, scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly. The sound of the water running in the bathroom masked my movements as I glanced at her nightstand. Her phone was charging there, the screen lighting up briefly to display a notification. I wasn't the prying type, at least, not until then. But curiosity gnawed at me. When the screen lit up again, I caught a glimpse of a name, Brian. Brian? My stomach churned. I didn't know a Brian, at least not one close enough to Rachel to warrant late-night texts. I shook my head, forcing myself to dismiss the thought. "It's nothing," I told myself. "It's probably one of Beth's friends." The rationalization didn't sit well, but I chose to ignore the tight knot forming in my chest. Over the next few days, life carried on like nothing was amiss, at least on the surface. Rachel went about her routine with her usual energy, juggling the kids, errands, and her part-time work at a local boutique. Her laugh still filled the house, her smile lit up the room, but the flicker of unease from that Sunday never left my mind. The name Brian had taken up residence in my thoughts. Every time I saw Rachel glance at her phone, every time she tucked it into her purse with just a bit too much care, the name hovered in the back of my mind like a nagging whisper. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. That evening, Rachel announced she was meeting Beth for coffee after dinner. The kids and I shared a quiet meal while Rachel left the house in a flurry of perfume and high heels. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. Rachel's laptop sat on the kitchen counter, where she often used it to shop or pay bills. My heart raced as I opened it and typed in the password, our anniversary date. It was almost too easy. I hated myself for the intrusion, but I couldn't stop. Her email was already logged in. I scrolled through the inbox, scanning subject lines that seemed mundane at first, work confirmations, school newsletters, and a sale at her favorite boutique. And then I saw it. Subject, "Can't wait for Friday Red Heart." From Brian. I clicked, holding my breath. The message wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. It was casual in tone, but the kind of casualness that comes with intimacy. "Hey Ratch, still thinking about last weekend. Can't wait to see you again. Same spot? I'll bring the wine this time, winking face dot." My stomach dropped. The email wasn't long, but every word felt like a sledgehammer. Last weekend? Same spot? What was happening while I was busy working overtime to pay for our life together? I forced myself to look through more messages, finding a few others sprinkled over the past month. They weren't numerous, but they were enough to tell me that Brian wasn't just a name. He was something, or someone, far more dangerous. When Rachel returned that night, her cheeks were flushed from laughter, and she carried the scent of coffee mixed with her perfume. She kissed my cheek and asked about the kids, her voice light and casual. I looked at her, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't know her at all. Friday came, and Rachel was more animated than usual. She had spent the morning getting ready, curling her hair, painting her nails, and carefully picking out her outfit, a black dress that hugged her in all the right places. She looked stunning, as always, but the effort felt calculated. "Are you sure you're okay taking the kids to your mom's tonight?" she asked, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "I really appreciate it." I nodded, trying to mask the storm brewing inside me. "Yeah, no problem. Thanks, babe," she said with a smile, her eyes sparkling. "I owe you one." She left just after 5, driving away with a cheerful wave and an upbeat song blasting from her car. The kids were still at their friend's house for a playdate, so I had some time to think before heading to my mom's. I wasn't planning to go there. I was planning to follow Rachel. I waited until the taillights of her car disappeared down the street before slipping into my own car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, a mix of adrenaline and dread coursing through me. I didn't know where she was headed, but I had an idea. The name Brian had come up in one of the emails in connection with a downtown wine bar. I drove toward it, my eyes scanning for her car. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding with every step. The wine bar was small, dimly lit, and intimate. Through the window, I spotted her almost immediately. Rachel sat at a corner table, her head tilted slightly as she laughed at something. Across from her sat a man, Brian, I assumed, leaning in close. His hand rested casually on hers. For a moment I just stood there, frozen in place. The scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life implode. But it wasn't someone else. It was me. I couldn't walk in there, not yet. I didn't trust myself to keep calm, and I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed proof. My phone shook in my hands as I snapped a few pictures through the window, capturing Rachel's animated expressions, Brian's smug grin, and the unmistakable intimacy between them. When I got home later that evening, Rachel was already back, lounging on the couch in her pajamas like nothing had happened. She smiled at me as I walked in, asking how my mom and the kids were. "They're fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "How was your girls' night?" "Oh, it was great," she said without missing a beat. "Beth and I ended up staying later than we planned, but it was nice to catch up." I nodded, biting back the words threatening to spill out. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Over the weekend, I took my time, piecing together more information. I checked our shared phone bill online and saw a number that matched Brian's popping up repeatedly. I found receipts for the wine bar on her credit card statement, always on nights when she was meeting Beth. Every discovery felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. By Sunday night, I had everything I needed. Emails, pictures, receipts. The truth was undeniable, and it left me raw and seething. But I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I figured out what I wanted to say, and how I wanted to say it. As Rachel slept beside me that night, her breathing soft and even, I stared at the ceiling, feeling like I was lying next to a stranger. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who could lie so effortlessly, so convincingly. I promised myself one thing as I lay there in the dark: when the moment came to confront her, I wouldn't hold back. I would lay everything bare, and she would have no choice but to face the destruction she'd wrought on our lives. Monday morning came with a heavy fog outside and an even heavier weight in my chest. The decision I had made during the sleepless hours of the night was clear: this farce couldn't go on. I was done tiptoeing around Rachel's deceit, collecting evidence like some amateur detective. It was time to start lighting fires and watching her lies burn. I waited until the kids were off to school, their laughter trailing behind them as they climbed onto the bus. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone with that practiced ease she always had. She was dressed in her usual loungewear, her hair tied back in a loose bun. It was hard to reconcile this relaxed image with the woman I had seen at the wine bar just days earlier, flirting and laughing with Brian like a carefree teenager. "Hey," I said, sitting across from her at the table. My tone was casual, but my heart pounded in my chest. She looked up with a smile. "Morning. You're up early." "Yeah, couldn't sleep much." I sipped my coffee, watching her carefully. "I was thinking, it's been a while since we had a date night. Maybe we should plan something for this weekend?" Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. "That's a great idea," she said, her smile widening. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet. Maybe dinner somewhere nice? Just the two of us." "That sounds perfect," she said, but I could sense her mind working behind that bright smile. She was trying to gauge if I knew something, if there was an ulterior motive to my suggestion. And there was, of course. I wanted to see just how far she'd go to keep up her act. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Rachel went about her routine, running errands and chatting with friends. I stayed home, working remotely and trying to focus on emails while my mind churned through the confrontation I had planned. By the time she returned in the late afternoon, I had made up my mind. We ate dinner as a family that evening, the kids chattering about their school projects while Rachel and I exchanged polite conversation. It all felt so normal, and yet the tension in the air was suffocating. After the kids went to bed, I waited until Rachel was settled in the living room, watching one of her favorite reality shows. I walked in with my laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I set it on the coffee table. "What's this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as I opened the screen. "Something I need to show you," I said, sitting down beside her. I pulled up the pictures I had taken of her and Brian at the wine bar, one after another, letting her take in every damning detail. Her smile faded, her face paling as realization dawned. What is this?" she stammered. "You tell me," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Because I'd really love to know what you were doing with him while I was home with the kids." She stared at the screen, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she scrambled for an explanation, some way to wriggle out of the trap I'd set. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice trembling. "He's just a friend. We were talking." "Talking?" I echoed, my voice rising. "That's your excuse?" "Because it didn't look like just talking to me, Rachel. And I have emails, receipts, and phone records to back that up." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "You've been spying on me?" "No," I snapped. "You've been lying to me. Don't try to turn this around, Rachel. I want the truth." She sat back, crossing her arms defensively. "Fine," she said, her voice cold now. "Yes, I've been seeing Brian. But it's not like you think. It's not serious. It's just something I needed." "Something you needed?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "What about what I need? What about the life we built together, the promises we made?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with emotion. Not this time. "You're always working," she said, her voice breaking. "You're never present. I've been so lonely, and Brian, he made me feel seen. He made me feel alive." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "So that's your excuse? I work hard to provide for this family, and you repay me by running around behind my back with some guy who makes you feel alive? That's pathetic, Rachel. I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her tears spilling over now. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said, standing up. "You did." The rest of the night passed in icy silence. Rachel tried to approach me a few times, but I shut her down each time, my anger simmering just below the surface. I slept in the guest room, lying awake for hours as the weight of everything pressed down on me. The next morning I called a lawyer. If Rachel thought she could manipulate her way out of this, she was wrong. I was going to make sure I came out of this with my dignity, and my kids. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day after the confrontation, the atmosphere in the house felt like a battlefield after the dust had settled. The kids were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing under their own roof, chattering over breakfast about their upcoming weekend plans. Rachel moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her face pale, her movements mechanical. I barely acknowledged her, focusing instead on the coffee cup in my hands. I couldn't look at her without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, I saw her sitting in that wine bar, her hand on Brian's, her face alight with laughter meant for someone else. "Do you want eggs, or just cereal?" Rachel asked the kids, her voice strained but steady. "Eggs," Jeremy shouted, his enthusiasm breaking the silence. "Cereal," Melissa said with a shrug. Rachel turned to the stove, her back to me, and for a moment I saw the woman I used to adore, the one who used to sing while flipping pancakes, who'd playfully throw flour at me during our weekend cooking experiments. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. As soon as the kids were off to school, Rachel turned to me. "Can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. "Talk about what?" I said, my tone sharp. "You've already made it pretty clear where we stand." "Please, Jacob," she said, her voice soft. "I owe you an explanation." "No," I said firmly, standing up from the table. "What you owe me is honesty, and you're about 6 months too late for that." I spent the rest of the day at work, burying myself in numbers and spreadsheets to avoid thinking about the mess waiting for me at home. My phone buzzed a few times with texts from Rachel, apologies, pleased to talk, but I ignored them all. By the time I got home, it was dark, and the house was quiet. Rachel was sitting in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I need to know what's going to happen," she said as I walked in. "What's going to happen?" I repeated, my voice cold. "That depends on you. Are you still seeing Brian?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's over." I ended it. I didn't believe her. Not entirely. But I had to know just how far she'd go to salvage what was left of our marriage. "Why now?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "Because I caught you?" Her silence was answer enough. Over the next week, I consulted with a lawyer, gathering everything I needed to prepare for the worst. I wasn't about to let Rachel walk away with everything I'd worked so hard to build. The lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Diane, listened patiently as I laid out the situation. "You have a strong case," she said, flipping through the emails and photos I'd provided. "Adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and the evidence is compelling. But this will be messy, Jacob. Are you prepared for that?" Messy didn't even begin to describe it. The thought of dragging the kids through a bitter divorce made me sick, but what choice did I have? Staying together for their sake felt like a slow death, a suffocating existence built on lies and betrayal. "I just want what's fair," I said, my voice low. "I don't want to hurt her, but I'm not going to let her walk all over me, either." Diane nodded. "Then we'll fight for that." Meanwhile, Rachel tried her best to pretend everything was fine. She threw herself into her routine, cooking elaborate dinners and planning family outings, but her efforts felt hollow. I knew she was trying to make up for what she'd done, but it was too little, too late. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table with the kids, Jeremy asked an innocent question that made my stomach turn. "Mom, who's Brian?" Rachel's fork froze halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. What do you mean, honey?" she stammered. "I heard you talking to him on the phone," Jeremy said, shrugging. "You said he was bringing wine or something. Is he your friend?" The room fell silent. Rachel's face turned crimson, and she glanced at me, her eyes pleading for help. But I wasn't about to bail her out. "He's someone your mom knows from work," I said evenly, my gaze locked on Rachel's. "Isn't that right?" Rachel nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, just a friend from work." Jeremy seemed satisfied with the answer, turning back to his plate, but Melissa wasn't so easily fooled. She watched Rachel closely, her young face etched with suspicion. After dinner, Rachel pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice a frantic whisper. You didn't have to say it like that in front of the kids. And you didn't have to blow up our marriage. I shot back. But here we are. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of Rachel's quiet sobs from the guest room. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but I forced it away. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. The next morning, I called Diane and told her to file the papers. Enough was enough. The divorce papers were filed on a brisk Friday morning. My lawyer, Diane, had made the process straightforward, though the weight of signing my name on those documents felt anything but simple. After everything, there was still a small, naive part of me that wanted Rachel to come clean, to fight for our marriage. But with every passing day, her silence, or worse, her half-hearted apologies, confirmed what I already knew: she wasn't the woman I married anymore. I hadn't told Rachel about filing yet. I wanted her to hear it from me, face to face, but I needed the timing to be right. I wasn't looking forward to the fight that was sure to follow. That evening, the kids were at a neighbor's house for a sleepover, giving us a rare moment of solitude. Rachel was in the kitchen, preparing dinner with an intensity that seemed almost desperate. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension lingering between us. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. She glanced at me over her shoulder, her smile faltering. "Can it wait until after dinner?" "No." My tone left no room for negotiation. "It can't." She set the knife down on the cutting board, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she turned to face me. "What's going on?" she asked cautiously. I pulled the papers from my bag and placed them on the counter between us. The words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," stared back at us, stark and unyielding. Her face crumpled. "Jacob, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can work through this. Please don't do this." "Work through what?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Your lies? Your affair? The way you've been gaslighting me for months? Tell me, Rachel, what exactly do you think we're working through?" She looked down, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I made a mistake," she said softly. "I know I did. But it's over. I ended it. I swear. It's not just about Brian," I said, shaking my head. "It's about trust. It's about the way you lied to me, to the kids, to yourself. How do you come back from that?" "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, stepping closer. "Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." I laughed bitterly, stepping back. "Don't give up on us?" That's rich coming from the person who gave up the moment she let another man into her life. The conversation spiraled from there. Rachel alternated between tears and anger, blaming me for being distant, for working too much, for not noticing her unhappiness. I countered with the sacrifices I'd made to provide for our family, the nights I'd spent wondering why my wife seemed so far away. "I was lonely, Jacob," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I needed someone to see me. And I didn't?" I shouted. "You think I haven't felt lonely too? But I didn't cheat on you, Rachel. I didn't throw everything away because things got hard." Her tears came harder now, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. The weekend passed in a haze. Rachel kept her distance, retreating to the guest room while I threw myself into work and spent as much time with the kids as possible. They didn't know about the papers yet. I wasn't sure how to tell them. How do you explain to an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that their family is breaking apart? On Sunday evening, Rachel finally emerged from her isolation. She stood in the doorway of my home office, her eyes red and swollen. "Can we please talk?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I sighed, setting my laptop aside. "What is it?" She walked in slowly, sitting on the edge of the desk. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About trust and how I broke it." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And I realized you're right," she said, her voice trembling. "I destroyed something we spent years building. I don't know if I can ever fix it, but I want to try." Her words were earnest, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't want to lose the life we had built, even if she had taken it for granted. "What about the kids?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "What do you think this is going to do to them?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I don't know. But I want to protect them, no matter what." "Then you should have thought about that before Brian." She flinched at the name, but I didn't regret saying it. She needed to feel the full weight of what she had done. As the days passed, the reality of our situation began to set in. Rachel tried to make amends, cooking family meals, leaving notes in my office apologizing for her actions. But I couldn't bring myself to engage. I felt like I was living with a stranger, a woman who wore my wife's face but whose heart had long since wandered away. The papers remained on the counter untouched. Part of me wanted to rip them up, to believe that Rachel's remorse was genuine and that we could find a way back to each other. But the other part of me knew better. Trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. The decision hung over me like a storm cloud, dark and threatening, as I prepared to take the next step. It wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about starting over, about protecting myself and my kids from the fallout of Rachel's choices. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: it was time to take control of my life again. This wasn't the ending I had wanted, but it was the one I was left with. And I was ready to face it. The Monday after I handed Rachel the divorce papers marked a new chapter in my life, one defined by emotional exhaustion and steely resolve. I had made my decision, and though it felt like ripping off a bandage soaked in salt water, it was a wound I had to let breathe. Rachel's reactions over the weekend had been a cocktail of desperation, remorse, and denial, but I wasn't willing to let her pain cloud my judgment. I spent that morning preparing for the next steps, reaching out to Diane for a follow-up on the filing process. She assured me that the paperwork was moving forward, and we discussed the logistics of dividing assets, child custody, and how best to approach breaking the news to Jeremy and Melissa. "Children this age are resilient," Diane said over the phone, her tone calm and professional. "But how you frame it will make all the difference. They don't need to know the details yet. Just that you both love them and will be there for them no matter what." No matter what. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. Would I really be able to shield them from the cracks in our foundation, from the harsh truth of their mother's betrayal? I wasn't sure. That evening, I sat down with Rachel in the kitchen, a quiet tension settling between us like a thick fog. She had prepared dinner again, another overly elaborate meal that felt more like an apology than nourishment. The kids had already eaten and were playing upstairs, their laughter a sharp contrast to the silence between us. "We need to tell them," I said, breaking the stillness. Rachel's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening slightly. "Now?" "Soon," I said. "They deserve to know what's going on before they start noticing things aren't the same." She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't even know what to say, Jacob. How do you explain this to a child?" "You tell them the truth," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "But not the whole truth. They don't need to know about Brian." Her face crumpled at the name, but I didn't care. "We tell them we're separating, that it has nothing to do with them, and that we both love them. That's all they need to hear right now." She nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the table. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The next night, we sat the kids down in the living room. Rachel and I had spent hours rehearsing what we would say, trying to anticipate every possible reaction. But as Jeremy and Melissa looked up at us with their wide, innocent eyes, every word I had prepared seemed to vanish from my mind. "Mom and I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice steady but low. "Things are going to change a little bit in our family." Jeremy tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "What kind of change?" Rachel took a deep breath, her hands gripping her knees tightly. "Your dad and I have decided that we're going to live in separate homes for a while." Melissa's lip quivered, her eyes darting between us. "You mean you're breaking up?" "It's not about breaking up," I said quickly, leaning forward to take her hand. "It's about making sure everyone is happy and healthy. This doesn't change how much we love you." "Why?" Jeremy asked, his voice tinged with anger. Why can't you just stay together? Rachel's tears spilled over, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. But she kept quiet, leaving me to shoulder the weight of the conversation. Sometimes, even when two people love each other, they realize they're better off apart, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean we love you any less. Nothing about that will ever change. Melissa began to cry, burying her face in Rachel's lap. Jeremy crossed his arms, his jaw set stubbornly as he glared at me. I don't want things to change. Neither did I thought bitterly. But here we were. The days that followed were a blur of tense silences and logistical planning. Rachel and I agreed that she would stay in the house with the kids while I moved into a small rental nearby. It wasn't ideal, but I wanted the kids to have some sense of stability in the middle of all this upheaval. Packing my things was both cathartic and devastating. Every box I filled felt like another nail in the coffin of the life we had built together. Photographs, old letters, souvenirs from family vacations, all reminders of what we used to be. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, so I shoved them into a box labeled miscellaneous, and left it in the attic. Rachel hovered nearby as I packed, her presence both unwelcome and unavoidable. She didn't say much, but every now and then I caught her watching me with a look of regret so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. Jacob, she said quietly one evening as I loaded a box into my car. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I paused, my hands tightening around the box. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe. But not today. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'll keep trying, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Moving into the rental was like stepping into a new life I hadn't asked for. The space was small and sparse, a far cry from the home I had shared with Rachel and the kids. But it was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. I set up a small corner for work, unpacked the essentials, and sat down on the warm couch with a beer in hand. The silence was deafening, but it was better than the tension I had left behind. I didn't know what the future held, whether Rachel and I would find a way back to each other or if this was truly the end. But for now, I was focused on one thing, rebuilding my life, one piece at a time. A week into living at my rental, the reality of separation had started to settle in. The house was quieter than I expected. No kids fighting over the TV remote, no Rachel moving about in the kitchen humming along to her favorite oldies playlist. The quiet was suffocating at times, and the weight of loneliness was undeniable. But I didn't let it consume me. I kept myself busy. Work became my anchor, and I poured hours into projects I'd previously let linger. If I wasn't working, I was unpacking the boxes I'd hastily thrown into my new space. Each object told a story, some bittersweet, some outright painful. I shoved most of it into the closet, not ready to confront it yet. Visitation with the kids was awkward at first. Rachel had insisted we try co-parenting without legal intervention, and while I agreed for their sake, it wasn't easy. She dropped them off at the rental with the kind of nervous energy I hadn't seen from her since we were newlyweds. Here's their homework schedule, she'd say, handing me a neatly written list. And Melissa has a field trip form that needs signing. I'd nod, keeping the conversation clipped, avoiding her eyes. She'd linger for a moment as if hoping for more, then leave quietly, the sound of the door closing like a nail driven into the coffin of our marriage. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Jeremy spent most of his time buried in his video games, occasionally asking when I'd come back home. Melissa, ever the sensitive one, stuck close to my side during their visits, peppering me with questions. Are you lonely here, Dad? She asked one night as I tucked her into the air mattress I'd set up in the spare bedroom. A little, I admitted. But I'm happy when you're here. She seemed to consider this for a moment, her small face scrunching up in thought. Do you think you and Mom will ever get back together? I froze, my hands pausing mid-reach for the blanket. I don't know, sweetheart, I said carefully. We're just figuring things out right now. She nodded, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. I hope you do. The following weekend, Diane called with an update. The divorce proceedings were moving along smoothly, too smoothly. Rachel hadn't contested anything so far, which worried me more than it reassured me. It felt like the calm before a storm. "You think she's up to something?" I asked, pacing the small living room. "It's possible," Diane said. "But it could also be guilt. Some people just want to get it over with." I wasn't sure which possibility felt worse. A few days later, I got my answer. It was a Wednesday evening when Rachel called, her voice hesitant. "Jacob," she said, "I think we need to talk about the house." "What about it?" I asked, already bracing for an argument. "Well, I've been thinking maybe it would be best if we sold it," she said carefully. "It's too big for just me and the kids, and I can't afford it on my own." "And where would you go?" I asked, my frustration mounting. "Have you thought this through?" "There's an apartment complex not far from their school," she said. "It would be smaller, but manageable. I've already looked into it." I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling the tension build. "Rachel, do you even realize how much this will disrupt the kids? First the divorce, now selling their home? They need stability." "I know that," she snapped, her voice cracking. "But I can't do this alone, Jacob. I'm trying my best." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For all her flaws and the pain she'd caused me, Rachel was still their mother. She was struggling, too. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice softer now. "But we need to make this decision together. For the kids." "Thank you," she whispered. "I appreciate that." The conversation left me reeling. The thought of selling the house, our house, felt like the final nail in the coffin. But I couldn't deny the logic behind Rachel's argument. Financially, it made sense. Emotionally? It felt like erasing the last remnants of the life we'd built together. That weekend, I met with Rachel at the house to discuss our options. It was the first time we'd been alone together since I moved out, and the air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. She had a list of realtors and potential apartment listings for herself and the kids, all neatly organized in a folder. I admired her practicality, even if it irritated me. "You've been busy," I said, flipping through the documents. "I don't have a choice," she said, her tone flat. "I need to start over, and so do you." Her words stung, but they weren't wrong. We agreed to list the house, though the decision left me hollow. As I walked through the empty rooms later, memories flooded back. Birthday parties, movie nights, the time Jeremy spilled an entire gallon of milk in the kitchen, and we laughed until we cried. This wasn't just a house. It was a chapter of my life that was closing, whether I was ready or not. The listing went live the following week, and offers came in quickly. By mid-month, we had an offer above asking price, and the reality of moving on became undeniable. Rachel and the kids packed their things, preparing for the transition to their new apartment, while I made arrangements to meet the buyer for final signatures. The day Rachel and the kids moved out was surreal. I stopped by to say goodbye to the house one last time, standing in the now empty living room where so many memories had been made. "It doesn't feel real," Rachel said, standing beside me. "It's real," I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Jacob, I know I can't fix what I broke. But I hope someday you'll forgive me." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to offer forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, as I sat in my rental, surrounded by boxes of memories I hadn't unpacked, I realized that the chapter one thought was ending was really just the beginning of a new story. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be painless. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a belief that, somehow, I'd find my way forward. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a new kind of rhythm. Rachel and the kids moved into their apartment, and I adjusted to living in my small rental. The house we'd called home for a decade was now in someone else's hands, and though it stung, I knew it was necessary. The first night alone after the move was the hardest. The silence felt oppressive, wrapping around me like a cold blanket. I sat on the couch with a bottle of beer, scrolling through photos on my phone. Pictures of the kids at birthday parties, vacations with Rachel, lazy Sundays in the living room. Each image felt like a snapshot of a life that no longer existed. But wallowing wasn't going to change anything. I'd made the decision to move forward, and it was time to act on it. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just Jacob, the husband and father navigating a divorce. I was still Jacob, the man who loved hiking, working on DIY projects, and spending Saturdays fixing things in the garage. Somewhere along the way, I'd let those pieces of myself fade, consumed by the grind of work and family responsibilities. It was time to find them again. I signed up for a woodworking class at a local community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. The first class was small, just 6 people, but there was a warmth to it. The instructor, a retired carpenter named Hal, greeted us like old friends. "You're here to learn, not to be perfect," he said with a grin. "So don't be afraid to screw up." By the end of the evening, I had a rough but satisfying start to a hand-carved bowl. More importantly, I felt a spark of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Co-parenting was a new frontier, one filled with its own set of trials and triumphs. The kids spent alternating weeks with me and Rachel, and while the transition wasn't seamless, we found ways to make it work. Jeremy had become more withdrawn since the separation, burying himself in his video games and shrugging off most of my attempts to engage him. It worried me, but I didn't want to push too hard. Instead, I found small ways to connect, joining him for a few rounds of his favorite games, even though I was terrible at them. "You're getting wrecked, Dad," he said one evening, laughing as his character obliterated mine. "Maybe," I said, grinning. "But I'm learning." Melissa, on the other hand, was as chatty as ever. She filled every quiet moment with stories about school, her friends, and the books she was reading. She had taken a shine to the woodworking projects I brought home, eagerly watching as I sanded and polished each piece. "Can I help next time?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Of course," I said. "We'll make something together." Rachel and I maintained a civil relationship, but the emotional distance between us was palpable. We coordinated schedules, discussed the kids' needs, and occasionally shared updates about their progress, but our conversations were brief and to the point. One evening, as I dropped the kids off at her apartment, she stopped me at the door. "Jacob," she said, her voice tentative. "Can we talk for a minute?" I hesitated but nodded, stepping inside. The apartment was modest but cozy, filled with the kids' artwork and photos from happier times. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "For being patient with the kids, for working with me on all this. I know it hasn't been easy." "It hasn't," I said honestly. "But I'm doing it for them. They deserve that much." She nodded, her eyes misting over. "I'm trying, Jacob. To be better. For them, and for myself." "I hope you do," I said, my tone softening slightly. "Because they need you. And if you're happy, it'll make things easier for everyone." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. But it was a step toward closure. As the months passed, I found myself focusing less on what I had lost and more on what I could build. The woodworking class turned into a full-blown hobby, with half the rental's garage now converted into a workshop. I even started selling some of my pieces online, a small but satisfying side hustle. I also began venturing out socially, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. A neighbor invited me to join a weekly trivia night at a local bar, and while I wasn't much help with pop culture questions, I discovered a knack for history and geography. The camaraderie was refreshing, a reminder that life could be fun again. And then there was Emily. I met Emily at a parent-teacher conference. She was Melissa's art teacher, a warm and approachable woman with a quick smile and an easy laugh. We struck up a conversation about Melissa's creativity, which led to a shared joke about how neither of us could draw a straight line without a ruler. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed more frequently, at school events, at the grocery store, even at the community center where I took my woodworking class. She was funny, down to earth, and refreshingly uncomplicated. One evening, after a particularly good trivia night, I found myself thinking about her. About how her laugh lit up a room, about how easy it was to talk to her. The thought scared me at first. Was I ready for something new? Could I trust myself to move forward without repeating the mistakes of the past? I didn't have the answers yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The weeks that followed my initial meeting with Emily were filled with an unexpected lightness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure what it was about her, a genuine warmth, her infectious laughter, or just the way she seemed to listen with undivided attention. Whatever it was, she had a way of making the weight I carried feel just a little lighter. At first, our interactions were purely coincidental. A quick chat during Melissa's school pickup or a shared laugh over forgotten art supplies. But the more I saw her, the more I realized I enjoyed her company. And yet, a part of me hesitated to pursue anything further. It felt too soon, too complicated. The turning point came one crisp Saturday morning at the local farmers' market. I had taken Melissa and Jeremy out for the day, hoping to distract them from the upheaval of our new routine. As we wandered through rows of stalls selling fresh produce and handmade goods, Melissa tugged on my sleeve. "Look, Dad! Miss Emily!" she exclaimed, pointing toward a stand selling pottery. Sure enough, there she was, dressed casually in jeans and a cozy sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked up as Melissa called out to her, her face lighting up with a smile. "Melissa!" she said warmly, crouching down to greet her. "What a nice surprise! And Jeremy, too! How's my favorite artist?" Jeremy shrugged but managed a small smile. Melissa, ever the extrovert, launched into a detailed explanation of the clay project she was working on at home. As Melissa and Jeremy busied themselves examining the pottery, Emily turned to me. "It's nice to see you outside of school," she said with a smile. "Are you enjoying the market?" "I am," I said, returning the smile. "It's been a while since I've had time for things like this." "I know the feeling," she said, glancing at the kids. "Sometimes it's nice to slow down and just be." We ended up walking through the market together, the conversation flowing easily. She told me about her love of painting, how she'd taken up pottery as a hobby during the pandemic, and her struggles to keep her classroom stocked with enough art supplies. "I'd love to help with that," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words came out. "Maybe I could make a few shelves or something for your classroom. I've been getting into woodworking lately." "Really?" Her eyes lit up. "That would be amazing. I've been wanting to reorganize the supply closet, but I'm hopeless with tools." "It's a deal, then," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the following week, word of my growing friendship with Emily had reached Rachel, likely through Melissa, who had enthusiastically recounted our trip to the market during one of her visits. "She seems nice," Rachel said one evening as she dropped off the kids. Her tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Curiosity? Jealousy? "She is," I said simply, not offering any more information than necessary. Rachel hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorframe. "Do you think it's serious?" I looked at her, surprised by the question. "It's not anything right now," I said honestly. "We're just friends." "Right," she said, nodding. "Well, the kids seemed to like her." I didn't know what to make of the exchange, but it left me with a strange mix of emotions. Was Rachel trying to gauge my feelings, or was this her way of testing the waters for her own sake? Either way, I wasn't going to dwell on it. My focus was on moving forward. Emily and I continued to cross paths, and before long, our casual conversations turned into something deeper. We began meeting for coffee after school events or chatting over text about everything from art projects to the best local diners. One evening, she invited me to her studio to see some of her paintings. The space was small but filled with vibrant canvases, each one telling a story. She showed me her favorite piece, a swirling mix of blues and greens that reminded me of the ocean. "This one's incredible," I said, genuinely impressed. "It feels alive." Thanks, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. It's my favorite, too. It's about finding balance, I think, between chaos and calm. I couldn't help but feel like the words applied to my own life. Standing there in that cozy, art-filled space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. It wasn't long before I realized that what I felt for Emily was more than friendship. She had become a constant presence in my life, someone who didn't just fill the gaps left by Rachel but offered something entirely new. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her how I felt, it was during a quiet walk along the river one evening. I don't know where this is going, I admitted, my voice steady but vulnerable. But I know I want to find out. With you. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft and searching. I feel the same way, she said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a grand declaration or a sweeping romance. It was simple, honest, and exactly what I needed. As my relationship with Emily deepened, my co-parenting arrangement with Rachel began to stabilize. There were still moments of tension, but they were fewer and farther between. For the kids' sake, we worked hard to maintain a united front, even if our paths were now firmly separate. Life wasn't perfect, but it was starting to feel like mine again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Emily and I continued to navigate the uncharted waters of our growing relationship. It wasn't without challenges. I was cautious, too cautious at times, and hesitant to let her fully into my life. But she understood, meeting my hesitations with patience and warmth. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't walking alone. The kids were naturally curious about Emily. Melissa had been her biggest fan since day one, always asking about Ms. Emily, and insisting on painting sessions whenever she visited. Jeremy was more reserved, unsure of how to feel about this new person in my life. Do you like her? He asked one evening, his voice quiet as we played a game of chess on the coffee table. I do, I said honestly, moving a pawn forward. But what matters most to me is how you and your sister feel. This doesn't change how much I love you both. Jeremy nodded, still staring at the board. She seems nice, he said finally, glancing up at me. But she's not Mom. I know, I said, meeting his gaze. She's not here to replace your mom. She's just someone who makes me happy. He nodded again, and though his expression remained neutral, I could see a hint of understanding behind his eyes. Meanwhile, Rachel was dealing with her own adjustments. She had taken on more hours at work, throwing herself into her job with the kind of focus I hadn't seen in years. We had fallen into a rhythm with the kids, drop-offs and pick-ups, holiday planning, and occasional family meetings to discuss school events or schedules. One evening, as Rachel and I exchanged notes about Jeremy's upcoming science fair, she paused and gave me a thoughtful look. You seem happier, she said softly. I think I am, I admitted. It hasn't been easy, but I'm finding my way. She nodded, a faint smile on her lips. I'm glad, she said, her voice genuine. You deserve to be happy, Jacob. It was a rare moment of peace between us, a reminder that while the wounds of our past hadn't fully healed, there was room for civility, and maybe even forgiveness. As Emily and I grew closer, I knew it was time to take another step forward. One Saturday afternoon, I invited her over for dinner with the kids. It was a casual affair, pizza and board games, but the stakes felt monumental. Melissa was ecstatic, chatting with Emily as if they'd been lifelong friends. Jeremy was more reserved, but I noticed him warming up as the evening progressed, especially when Emily joined him in a game of Jenga and pretended not to notice when he cheated. You're pretty good at this, he said, a rare smile creeping onto his face. Beginner's luck, Emily replied with a wink, making him laugh. By the end of the night, both kids were asking when Emily would come over again. As I tucked them into bed, Melissa whispered, I like her, Dad. She's fun. Me too, I said, kissing her forehead. Not everything was smooth sailing. A few weeks later, Rachel unexpectedly showed up during one of Emily's visits. She had come to drop off a forgotten school project for Jeremy, unaware that Emily was there. The tension in the room was immediate, an invisible line drawn between past and present. Emily, ever gracious, offered a polite smile and stepped aside to let Rachel speak with the kids. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Rachel said, her tone tight as she glanced at me. "You're not interrupting," I said, trying to keep things calm. After a brief exchange, Rachel left, her shoulders stiff as she walked to her car. I could see the hurt in her eyes, and it stayed with me long after she'd gone. Later that evening, I received a text from her. "I know it's none of my business, but seeing you with her, it's harder than I thought it would be." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I understand. This hasn't been easy for me either, but I need to move forward. I hope you can too." Her response came quickly. "I'm trying." Emily and I continued to grow closer, but as the months passed, I realized I couldn't keep her at arm's length forever. If this relationship was going to work, I needed to be all in. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Emily curled up beside me with a cup of tea. I took a deep breath. "I want you to know how much you mean to me," I began, my voice steady but nervous. "You've been patient and understanding, and you've brought so much light into my life. I don't know what the future holds, but I want you to be a part of it." She looked at me, her eyes soft and filled with emotion. "I feel the same way," she said, her hand finding mine. "Whatever comes next, I'm here for it." Life didn't magically become perfect overnight, but it started to feel more balanced. The kids adjusted to the new normal, Rachel and I maintained a respectful co-parenting relationship, and Emily became a steady presence in my life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on solid ground, not defined by my past, but shaped by it. I had learned to trust again, to let go of the anger and regret that had once consumed me. This was a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty but also hope. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it. Just as life began to settle into its new rhythm, the past found a way to creep back in. It started with a phone call from Rachel on a Tuesday evening, her voice tense and hesitant. "Jacob, we need to talk," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "What's going on?" I asked, already bracing for bad news. "It's about Brian," she said after a long pause. I froze, the name cutting through me like a blade. It had been months since I'd thought of him, months since his presence in Rachel's life had been exposed and shattered everything we'd built together. "What about him?" I asked, my voice tight. "He called me," Rachel admitted, her words coming in a rush. "He said he wanted to talk, that he regrets how things ended. I don't know what he's expecting, but I thought you should know." "Why would he call you now?" I asked, struggling to keep my anger in check. "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I haven't seen or spoken to him since everything happened. I just wanted to be honest with you, in case this turns into something." "Something like what, Rachel?" I snapped. "I don't know," she said, frustration edging into her tone. "But I don't want him disrupting the progress we've made. With the kids, with co-parenting, with everything." Her words hung in the air, and despite my initial anger, I realized she was right. As much as I wanted to write Brian off as irrelevant, the truth was he had already caused enough damage. The following week, I noticed a subtle shift in Rachel's demeanor. She was more reserved during our interactions, distracted in a way that reminded me of the months leading up to her affair. It stirred up old anxieties I thought I'd buried, and I hated that Brian still had this kind of power over both of us. One Friday, as I dropped the kids off at Rachel's apartment, I decided to address it head-on. "Has Brian reached out again?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Rachel shook her head. "No. But it's been on my mind." "Rachel," I said, softening my voice, "if he's trying to come back into your life, you need to think about what that means. For you, for the kids, for everything." "I know," she said quietly. "I have no intention of letting him back in. I hate that he's even part of this story." "So do I admitted. I shared the situation with Emily later that evening, unsure of how much to reveal but needing someone to talk to. She listened intently, her expression thoughtful as I explained Rachel's phone call and my lingering frustrations. Do you think she's still vulnerable to him? Emily asked, her tone careful. I don't know, I admitted. I'd like to think she's moved on, but part of me wonders if there's still something unresolved there. Emily placed her hand over mine, her touch grounding me. You're doing everything you can, Jacob. You've set boundaries, you've focused on the kids, and you've been honest. Whatever Rachel decides to do with her life is out of your control. I know, I said, sighing. But it's hard not to feel like this is still affecting me, even though I've moved on. It's okay to feel that way, she said gently. Just don't let it pull you back into a place you've worked so hard to leave behind. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that while the past might cast its shadow, it didn't have to define my present. The issue came to a head a week later when Rachel called me again, her voice trembling. Jacob, he showed up at my work, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. What? I said, anger flaring instantly. What did he want? He said he wanted to apologize, she said, her voice tight. He wanted to talk about how things ended, about us. And what did you say? I demanded. I told him there is no us, she said firmly. I told him to leave and that I didn't want him contacting me again. Good, I said, my jaw clenched. But Rachel, this can't keep happening. If he keeps showing up, you need to get serious about protecting yourself, and the kids. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't expect this. I thought it was over. It is over, I said firmly. And you need to make sure he knows that. Rachel's encounter with Brian left us both shaken, but it also forced us to confront something we hadn't fully addressed, the lingering scars of what had happened. For Rachel, it was a reckoning with the choices she had made and the people she had let into her life. For me, it was a reminder that healing wasn't a linear process and that the past had a way of resurfacing when least expected. Through it all, Emily remained my constant. Her unwavering support gave me the strength to focus on what mattered most, my kids, my future, and the life I was building beyond the wreckage of my marriage. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, I turned to her and said, I don't know where I'd be without you. She smiled, her hand resting on mine. You'd still be here, Jacob. You're stronger than you think. For the first time, I believed her. Life has a way of testing you, pushing you to your limits before offering glimpses of hope. The situation with Brian, as disruptive as it was, forced both Rachel and me to confront our past and finally lay certain ghosts to rest. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The following week, Rachel called me again, but this time her voice carried a newfound resolve. I've filed a restraining order, she said simply. Good, I replied, surprised but relieved. I needed to take control, she continued. Not just of the situation with Brian, but of my life. I let things get out of hand before, and I'm not going to let it happen again. I could hear the strength in her voice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of respect for the woman I'd once loved. That's a good step, Rachel, I said. For you, and for the kids. She paused, then added, I also wanted to say thank you. For being patient with me, for staying civil even when I didn't deserve it. Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I just wanted what was best for the kids, I said finally. And you've done that, she said. But I also think you've taught me something about accountability. I can't change what I did, but I can learn from it. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense, but it felt genuine. It felt like closure. With the Brian ordeal behind us, things began to stabilize for the kids. Jeremy, who had always been more skeptical about the changes in our family, started to open up during our one-on-one time. You're happier now, he said one evening as we built a bookshelf together in the garage. Yeah, I admitted, glancing at him. I think I am. Do you think Mom is happier too? I hope so, I said carefully. She's figuring things out, just like I am. Jeremy nodded thoughtfully. I think Emily makes you happy. he said, his voice quieter now. She does, I said, surprised by his insight. How do you feel about that? He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I think she's cool. And you laugh more when she's around. That simple observation meant more to me than I could express. Melissa, ever the optimist, had already fully embraced Emily's presence in our lives. The two of them often bonded over art projects, their laughter filling the house in a way that made it feel like a home again. A few months later, Emily and I took the next step in our relationship. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment, no sweeping declarations or elaborate gestures. Instead, it was a quiet conversation over coffee on a Saturday morning. I think it's time we made this official, I said, my hand resting over hers. Her eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and caution. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, I said. You've been patient with me, with the kids, with everything. I want to take this next step with you. She smiled, her fingers intertwining with mine. Then let's do it, she said. Emily moved in a few weeks later, and while the transition wasn't without its challenges, it felt right. She didn't try to replace Rachel in the kids' lives, she respected their boundaries and earned their trust in her own way. Rachel, to her credit, took the news with grace. I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy, she said one evening after a school event. Thanks, I said. I hope you do too. She smiled faintly, but there was a sincerity in her eyes. A year after Emily and I made things official, we hosted a small dinner to celebrate our blended family. Rachel even stopped by briefly, dropping off a gift for Melissa but staying just long enough to wish us well. It wasn't awkward. It was a reminder that while our marriage had ended, we'd managed to find a way to coexist for the sake of the kids. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the porch, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. Emily joined me, slipping her hand into mine. They're happy, she said, her voice soft. They are, I agreed. And so am I. It wasn't the life I had envisioned all those years ago, but it was mine. And it was good. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.